Hi, welcome back to the Terms and Conditions. I'm Martha, and welcome to the first episode of 2017. I hope you had a lovely break, whatever you celebrated, whether you celebrated at all. And yeah, let's just get into it. It's going to be a huge year. I've just moved to London, so I'm hopping around spare rooms and sofas at the moment, but I'm hoping to be able to bring more reliable content in the new year. It's going to be great. Yeah, and I just wanted to do, as I did a Halloween themed episode, I wanted to do an episode themed around Christmas and the holidays and the kind of end of year period. Yeah, so I just wanted to get into it. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is grandparents and generations and how different it is for people of my generation, millennials, dealing with not just their parents but their parents' parents and great uncles and great aunts and that sort of level of the family tree, and these kind of generational differences that we have and the tension and the awkwardness that can come with that. So I think it's suffice to say, I've talked to a few friends about this, but I think it's suffice to say that most people have at least one racist grandparent, right? I don't if any of my beautiful family are watching this, I don't want I'm not calling anyone out, but most from what I've heard of just personal anecdotes from friends, everyone has at least one great uncle or aunt or grandparent who's a Trump supporter, right? Is not necessarily a Trump supporter, but that kind of type of person who's look, back in my day, we had rations and we lived through the war and it was all about the war effort and you millennials are just obsessed with your Instagram and your tweets and that sort of thing. Old man ranting. It doesn't have to be a man. It's just in my mind, it's just personified by an old man in a rocking chair ranting at someone. That's just how my brain works. So, and I'm guilty of old man ranting. Old man ranting is a perfectly, it's a very accessible thing to engage with. So we can do it just hit me up. We'll do it together sometime. It'll be great. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this difference in generations and how I don't want to call people out for being racist because I think people are just a product of their time, right? They're just a product of the resources that were available to them, of the education they had access to, of potentially being scripted to go and fight in a war because your country said you had to. That's insane. That's something I've never had to think about, or never had to realistically think about, that my guy friends or my brother or people my age might have to go and fight in a war. That's a terrifying thing to think. And everything was focused around the war effort, right? Everything was focused on, if you weren't fighting in the war, you were either ashamed to your family, or you were too old, or you were working at home and you were building up the factories again and keeping the home fire burning. And that's so admirable. That's such an incredible thing. And I can't imagine, having to ration everything and having to think about extreme scarcity of resources. And it's an incredible thing, and it's shaped a generation. And that has its downfalls. That means that they're they might hate the Japanese for some reason, some historical reason or another, or they might have racist inklings, or they might hate millennials because they think everything's handed to them on a platter. And arguably, of course, we have more resources now, and that comes with its own set of issues, which are just as valid, but different. And this generational divide, I think, it is really wide. I mean, so much has changed in the world. I would potentially argue more than like any other time in history. More has changed in the world in the last, like, what's between me and my grandparents, like 60 years? Um, about maybe 50 or 60 years. Like, so much has changed in the last 50 or 60 years that like it it makes it mind blowing. It's this huge like crevasse, right, of like of this space between us. And I would suggest, even though it's probably a little bit late now because you might not see your older relations for a while, but like, I think it's important to just like recognize that, like, yes, your grandparents are gonna have like completely different worldviews to you. Like, your grandparents are gonna have completely different life experiences from you, and like, that's fine. People aren't inherently racist. People aren't inherently closed-minded. It's just they're a product of their time, and I think it's really important to remember that. That doesn't mean that like we shouldn't attempt to engage in conversation and engage in a discussion about like what the world looks like today, and the importance of letting people be themselves and express their identities online, and that kind of thing. Like, it's important to so with that sort of older generation, there's quite a bit of racism. There might be a bit of homophobia or like transphobia, a little bit of like ingrained misogyny, and like it is just kind of a fact that like there probably were more women as like housewives and men as breadwinners back in the day, like in our grandparents' generation. And like, women stayed home and they had the babies and they looked after the babies, and the men went out and like didn't express any feelings. They like stoically went to work, and like they grew up through the war effort, and like they brought home the bacon. Like, that was it. And like, that's like good for you. That's awesome. Like, I respect that, right? Like, everyone was just like doing their bit. But like, things have changed now. That's not a given anymore. That's not like your life plan anymore. So I think, give your grandparents a bit of slack, right? They're trying the best they can, and they're just a product of their time. And with that, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge the privilege that we have, and it's important to do that like amongst millennials when we're talking about like race and gender and like all of that stuff. I talk a lot about acknowledging your privilege and like understanding the privilege that you have, but just in a like broader sense, generationally, we have a lot more privilege than they did. So the majority of millennials are university educated. I think it's like, maybe it's not the majority. Maybe it's like, I think it's like 36% of millennials are university educated. I read that somewhere. We have a lot more resources at our disposal. That means that the housing market is like a nightmare. So is the job market. But at the same time, right, every generation wants something better for the next. And that's something that my mum has always told me. It's like, I don't want you to like live my life. I want you to have a better life. And it's always about like the next generation wants a better life for the next one. So I think it's important. So I think if you get into a discussion with a grandparent or an older relation about generational differences, I think it's important to sit down and be like, but like, isn't this what you wanted? When you had kids, didn't you want them to have a better life than you did? And like, I understand that you had a shit time. Like, I'm sorry. Like, but like, things are good now, right? Like, and you seem perfectly happy. It's been okay, right? Like, it's fine. But isn't this like, it is better now, and like, we're grateful for it. Like, we reap the rewards of that. I think that's really important, and it's all about communicating ideas. Where, as a generation, I think millennials are more tolerant than any generation before us. We're more tolerant of different kinds of people and different ideas, hopefully. I mean, sometimes I waver on that. Sometimes I'm tempted to go on like a rant and be like, oh, you support Trump, like, oh, you're the worst. But at the same time, like, I think, you know, we are more tolerant than ever before. We don't think that like black people are inherently worse than white people and they have to sit on like a different bit of the bus or have a different water fountain. We don't even have water fountains anymore because they're so unsanitary and gross. Like, you know, that's the level of privilege we're dealing with here. That's amazing. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and to, you know, be grateful for that. But also use it to continue to make the world better. Like, we can't just stand still and be like, well, shit, like, maybe this is as far as it goes because like we're all just spoiled brats now. Like, there is more room to grow and there's more space to develop and make things better for the next generation. Also, oh my god, I'm like so obsessed with this. My t-shirt says Femme Liberté, or Femme Liberté. My mum said it's Femme Liberté. But I'm obsessed with it. It's from Topshop. Anyway. If you're listening on the podcast, like, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but it says Femme Liberté and it's great. Okay, so the next point I wanted to talk about is political correctness. And a lot of, again, I'm just like having an episode about like old people, am I right? But a lot of the older generation get really cranky about like the level that political correctness has gone to, especially with the expression like happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas, or like season's greetings, but that's more like just in like Hallmark cards. But yeah, like happy holidays. And I think the important thing to know is that in this like incredibly globalized world that we live in now, because there are so many more people in like dense urban environments and so many more crossovers of cultures just in everyday lives, it is important to understand that like the Gregorian calendar and the, you know, the Christianity of white people is no longer as important as it was. Like Christianity is, I don't know the demographics and the statistics on it, but it's a pretty white tradition. Like, and Christmas as a holiday has been, in air quotes, has been perpetuated through like, you know, white culture, through movies like Love Actually and The Holiday and Elf, and like, you know, all these like movies that make it seem like this incredibly festive thing, when actually, like, if you look at it historically, it's I think there's a history of it being like for like Satanists or something, and we don't actually know that Jesus was born on the 25th. I'll link up a video from Adam Ruins Everything. I can't remember it exactly, but like I saw it a while ago and it was really good. So Christmas, right? Like, it just centers white people. It just centers like white people's traditions, and, you know, the tradition of like, look at all of us being white and like putting up a tree and like wearing an ugly jumper and like, you know, being merry. Like, you don't see crossovers of culture in those popular culture social references that we all think about when we think of Christmas. Like, honestly, like, think about it. So when we have these crossovers of culture, we need to acknowledge and, like, you know, at the very bare minimum, just be like, you have a different holiday to me. Like, I'm not going to make you, I'm not going to enforce my holiday upon you. Like, you celebrate Kwanzaa or Hanukkah, or like, you don't celebrate at all, like, because you choose not to participate. Because it, like, in a lot of ways, it is kind of just a commercial thing in the same way that like Valentine's Day is, right? It's just been a commercialized, arbitrary day. We don't know if Jesus was actually born on that day. Lots of us who celebrate Christmas aren't even Christian. Like, it's just become this cultural practice rather than a religious one. And it's like perfectly acceptable to opt out or to have a different cultural practice. And so I think by introducing the term happy holidays and introducing this level of political correctness, we can begin to, like, yeah, just acknowledge other people's experiences and lifestyles instead of like saying, oh, if you don't follow my traditions, like if you don't participate in my cultural practices, they don't exist to me. Like, and I will only say to you, Merry Christmas, and like that's about it. Yeah, rant over. But yeah, I hope you had. I think that's kind of what I wanted to get through today. I hope you had a really lovely Christmas. I also hope you had a really good, like, Gregorian calendar New Year. If you're Chinese, I don't know, like, you might celebrate Chinese New Year. You might celebrate Gregorian New Year. I don't know. Yeah, I hope you had like a really lovely Christmas and New Year with friends or family or just loved ones. If not, I'm sorry. Like it is rough. I get it. I do get it. But I'm sending you all my love, and hopefully I'll be able to record a new episode soon. If you have any suggestions on what you'd like to listen to next, shoot me an email. Like, I'm around. I'm down to clown. Please don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Facebook. The page is called The Terms and Conditions, and on Twitter, if you want, it's called The T's and C's Pod. Or you can go to my website, thetermsandconditions.net, to find all of the links. Yeah, okay. I hope you have a good one. Okay.